Looking for a home that keeps you connected to Silicon Valley without the usual barriers to entry? The Gates in Morgan Hill by City Ventures is a walkable neighborhood near downtown restaurants, outdoor trails, and an easy commute to the Bay Area. It's a small town setting with access to major career hubs. Every home is all electric with buyer-owned solar included. With limited availability, now's the time to take a closer look. Discover your new home at cityventures.com. That's cityventures.com.
Hello, my name's David Seaman, and this is the Three Lions Podcast.
And welcome to the Three Lions Podcast. My name is Russell Osborne, and this is an independent England football supporters podcast. I hope I find you well. Football, well, it never stops, does it? No sooner has the World Cup finished, you'd think it would all be packed away, and we just leave Spain to bask in their own triumph. We may give them a round of applause when they come to Wembley at the end of September, but for the vast majority of us, it's move on, and we'll talk about it in, 2 or 3 years' time when qualifying returns. But no. Almost a week after Spain lifted that trophy in the MetLife Stadium, FIFA President Gianni Infantino returned across not just the sports pages, but headline news as well, with his FFE proposal, plan, idea, whatever it may be. FFE being FIFA Forward Enterprise, which, in a quick nutshell, let's see how I can do this. It's a proposed commercial subsidiary designed by FIFA to consolidate the broadcasting, sponsorship, ticketing and operational rights for all of FIFA's tournaments. They would allow private investors to acquire minority stakes in the World Cup. We're talking 20%. With the aim of increased funding for football development through its 211 member associations. Now, as you would expect, this set off shockwaves across, well, not just the footballing world, but the financial world, and Joe Public too. Everyone wanted a say on this. The vast majority could see this was just an excuse for FIFA and Infantino to try and become richer. Infantino, facing the backlash, continued by saying this was an opportunity, but not an obligation, and that it could unlock new commercial value to benefit those member associations. One of these investing companies launched is run by Joshua Kushner, brother of Jared Kushner, who happens to be Donald Trump's son-in-law. After all we'd experienced in the run-up to the World Cup, during the World Cup, does this surprise you? Do I need to continue with the outrage? The outrage was football is not for sale. The World Cup is not FIFA's to sell. Various associations came out with their statements, generally all saying they were blindsided, taken by surprise by this announcement. Our own FA, they actually said something for once. We were completely unaware of this proposal and have no substantive details, including what the proposition actually is and what conditions are attached. Based on the limited information, we are deeply concerned about the lack of process and governance to get to this point and the apparent substance and principles involved. When the proposal is shared in full and transparent way, now promised by FIFA, we will make our views clear and comment further. UEFA had been vocal throughout the World Cup on various topics. And following this, their president, Alexander Ceferin, called an emergency meeting with their 55 members on the 30th of July. Coming together, they have agreed to boycott future World Cups if FIFA proceed with this plan, saying, "We unanimously and unequivocally reject FIFA's proposal to transfer ownership interests in the World Cup and other FIFA competitions to private investors." The World Cup cannot be treated as an investment product. It is one of football's greatest sporting legacies. It has been built over generations by players, national teams and supporters across every continent. No part of it should ever be surrendered to private investors. The World Cup is not for sale. Our own FA, well, they followed this up by saying, "We stand shoulder to shoulder with our European colleagues and fully support the collective view. We oppose FIFA's plans. The FIFA World Cup belongs to football and always will." It's been a turbulent few days, and it's very reminiscent of the breakaway Super League from a few years ago. And I'm sure there will be much more to come. Infantino, well, he won't want to look silly on the world stage and will spin this as much as he can. But a World Cup without the backing or participation of UEFA, where from the most recent World Cup, 6 of the quarter-finalists came from UEFA and 3 of the semi-finalists also too. A World Cup without UEFA surely won't have the interest its previous 23 editions have had. In a nutshell, my own personal opinion, Infantino needs to go and FIFA once again needs to be overhauled, but properly this time. Anyway, I mention that as if maybe you've been under a rock for the past few days. That may all be news to you, and the end of this conversation I'm about to play you may not have made sense. Anyway, with the World Cup having passed, I wanted to find out what it was really like from someone who worked there. Someone who saw the team up close on a regular basis. And who better than the Standard's Dom Smith. Now it's my pleasure to welcome back to the Three Lions podcast, friend of the show, Dom Smith. Dom from the Standard. Hiya.
Hello, nice to be here.
Oh, you're always welcome. Always welcome. You've had a bit of a busy summer, so I'm pleased that you've given us a little bit of time.
Yes, no, it's nice to come on and speak about the World Cup and probably plenty of England as well.
Yeah. Do you know what? I just had a quick look back. I Google AI'd myself, or I Google AI'd the Three Lions podcast and Dom Smith. When did Dom first appear on the show? And it came back saying the episode 19, April 2018. When you were doing englandfootball.org, you were documenting England online on the excellent website that's still out there. And here we are, 8 years later. You've just returned from the World Cup, reporting on that. I congratulate you. I'm very proud of you to have seen you grown in a strange way.
It's very kind. Well, I'm delighted that I've been able to go to a major tournament and particularly to cover England so quickly. And yeah, I don't write on my old website, my blog, englandfootball.org anymore, but I do pay the subscription fee to keep it live every year because I think it's a nice memory, really, and
Absolutely.
it's what got me into some of the rooms that I get to go into now, and it's exactly the reason why I keep coming on this podcast because this helped me a lot in those early times as well. So no, it's very nice. It's very nice to think back.
Yeah. Just going to the World Cup. How did it all come about? Take us back to sort of, I don't know, that first conversation of saying, Dom, do you want to go to the World Cup?
Yeah, I mean, I was always in scope to go with a colleague of mine around about sort of October or November. I was in scope that there might be 2 that would be going, but the Evening Standard, or the Standard rather, the website which I work for, separated from the paper, and got bought by the Independent, and that was around about March or April, which was sort of comically bad timing for someone hoping to go to the World Cup. And by this point, the other person who was more senior than me had left to join a different newspaper. So I was now kind of the most in scope to go to the World Cup, even if it had just ended up being one. And then there was a certain amount of doubt about whether we would send anyone, and I sort of plugged away and made sure that they were aware that it's a massive opportunity and that covering the World Cup is probably covering this World Cup would be more expensive than anything that, the Standard, not just on sport, but on any desk would need to do in the next probably 8 to 10 years, but that it really is not worth letting it pass them by, was my perspective. And credit to the Independent and the Standard within that, who sort of listened to what I was saying, didn't think that I was just someone hoping for a free holiday, and did make it happen. So that is how it happened. But there was a certain amount of jeopardy that it was going to happen at all. So I think that kind of will add to my memories when I look back at it in years to come, with the fact that it was, at moments, it was in doubt and it still managed to happen. So that was how it happened.
Well done for plugging away and keeping at them and sort of putting your side across. So when did you set foot on the plane then to head over there? So I had my flights for the group stage booked before my flight to America itself. And I managed to convince the paper, and they were in agreement that it made sense for me to stay out there even until the final, even if England had gone out quite early. So wow. I was going to stay out for the whole thing, which was a good kind of coup for them, but also, of course, for me. So we managed to make some savings in terms of London to America flights, because it meant I could pick, the exact flight that I would fly back on, and it wouldn't need to change. So I flew out on the Saturday the 13th, 2 days after the World Cup had started, on the evening of the Thursday, where obviously Mexico beat South Africa. So I went out on the 13th, the same day that England flew from Florida in their pre-tournament camp to Kansas City. So I arrived quite a similar time to England. So were you sort of always going to be based sort of Kansas City area? Because that's where England were based, wasn't it?
Yeah. England didn't necessarily follow what some countries did and what FIFA at times were recommending countries do, which was have a base camp during the group stage, but then during the knockouts potentially start moving city to city from each match,
following their path, I guess.
Yeah, exactly. England, I think, certainly from the time of Gareth Southgate, had come to quite like the idea of a home from home, which, in fairness, they probably would have done, even in Germany 2006, if they'd gone quite far. They would still have kept coming back to Baden-Baden. But certainly the value of having a home from home, became most clear during the years under Southgate, really. I think that's fair to say. Yeah. And England were keen to keep that going. And it was always going to be somewhere in the middle of the country, so as to minimise the number of time zones they would cross at any one time. So every flight that they took, they might cross one or maybe two time zones, but no more than that, which is why they settled on Kansas City in Missouri, because it's a flyover state. It's right in the middle of the country. And yes, overall, it does mean that I took more flights than I might have done. And it certainly means that England took a few more flights than they would have done if they had started to sort of city hop. But that was not their aim. So that was my destiny. Yeah.
Well, I'll ask you towards the end, maybe, if you were one of these ones that tallied up all your flights, your grounds, your hotels and miles or whatever. But before that, what was the sort of the England setup in Kansas City like? Obviously, we saw little bits on the telly and on the Lion's Den podcast that the FA in England put out. But what was it like from your perspective?
So England stayed in the inn at Meadowbrook, which was just south of Kansas City, which is not somewhere that I actually ended up going to. That was their hotel, at least.
Right.
And that was a hotel that had 52 rooms. So it was really, really impressive of them to find something that fit their spec, which was basically a very high-end hotel that didn't have 200 rooms, so they weren't often coming into meeting people who were the general public. It was secluded to an extent, and it was actually very close to very close actually to a gated community where Taylor Swift lives with her now husband Travis Kelce, who plays of course his sport in Kansas City. So
of course, yes.
So yes, that was interesting. That was where England were based. That hotel, the Inn at Meadowbrook, was actually in Kansas State. The funny thing is, Kansas City is in Missouri; it's not in Kansas.
Right.
So when they took the 19-minute travel on the bus from their hotel to training every day, they were crossing the state border. They were moving into Missouri, going from a city where weed is legal to a state where it's not, or vice versa. I can't remember which way. So
did they have to get stopped every time they crossed that border? Because having been to the States before, I seem to remember getting stopped.
Not sure. I mean, I went to Argentina training at one point to see Lionel Messi and his teammates train, and that was
as you do,
yeah. And that was briefly into Kansas State, and I didn't get stopped, so
okay.
I'm not sure, but potentially. But talk about Argentina. I mean, the thing is, Kansas City was the smallest of the host cities, but it was also, it also hosted some pretty big nations. It hosted Netherlands and Argentina. And therefore, those two nations wanted to base themselves there as well. And Argentina's first game was against Algeria. Obviously, Messi scored the hat-trick. Algeria also based themselves in Kansas City. So it was the city, it was the settlement, actually, towns included, where the most World Cup teams picked for their base camp. And Argentina, England, and the Netherlands are all top seeds. It was the only place where more than one top seed wanted to base themselves. 3 of them based themselves there. So it became very competitive, not just the city itself, but it became very competitive who would get which training facilities. And that's done based on a priority sort of formula, which starts with who actually plays there. England, of course, never played in Kansas City, so they lost out to both the Netherlands and Argentina and Algeria on that front. And in fact, that's the reason why Argentina ended up with the base camp of, let me think about this, Sporting Kansas City. Which, when I went there, it was far more state-of-the-art than where England were training because of that. The next differential is FIFA ranking. And of course, Argentina were ahead before this tournament of England in the FIFA ranking, as well as having more games in Kansas than England. So England didn't get their first choice training base. They ended up at Swope Soccer Village, which was... it was absolutely fine in terms of the level of grass, and it was actually closer to Premier League level. It was closer to the type of grass that you find in the Premier League than Sporting Kansas City's facilities, even though that was a better place per se. But it did look simplistic. It did have a slight sort of sports day vibe to it, if I'm completely honest. But it was nice, and I think England really enjoyed it. And I think if you were to speak to any of the England players, they would say that they enjoyed that base, they enjoyed the hotel, they enjoyed Kansas City itself. So yeah, I think a lot of us enjoyed this kind of hidden gem of the World Cup. Kansas City, narrowly missed out on being a host of the 1994 World Cup, and that was very, very gutting to the people who had sort of put it forward. And it was about to miss out on this World Cup as well, until Chicago pulled out, deciding that it didn't want to spend all of the money that host cities have to spend. So Kansas came in and never looked back, really, and I think was one of the success stories of the tournament. So that's my long answer to your question.
So, well, sticking with that sort of training base, was that where all the media conferences that the team done were based out of, and that you would have attended?
Yeah, apart from the ones which were match day -1, the pre-match ones, which were done in the cities, obviously, then yes, that's where it was. England, the FA worked very hard to find somewhere that they could set up their sort of in Kansas City, England Media Centre. And what they ended up doing was reaching an arrangement with what is effectively Kansas City's local version of Thames Water. It's local water supply,
Right.
because that building just happened to be a 2-minute drive from Swope Soccer Village where England were training. And so every time we finished watching open training, we would get in the car, drive for literally a minute and a half, and pull into this second car park, which had like the local water, and sort of parks, sort of council buildings, and they were transformed into the England Media Centre for a few weeks. So it was the name of the place was KC Parks and Recreation.
That's quite bizarre, because literally 5 minutes from my house there is a sort of Thames Water facility, and I'm just having these visions of like the England team set up there.
Well, can you imagine them receiving the email from the English Football Association? I mean, it's the likes of which they'll never receive again.
Speculative email, just wondering about your availability.
Would you mind working from home for 5 weeks so that we can crash the party for a bit? How bizarre must that have been? But yeah, it worked. It worked very well. Very well.
Great stuff. Well, of course, we all know that the path England took, the group stages through the knockouts, and the way it all panned out. But how was it going to some of these grounds? What ones stood out for you?
I think a lot of us would say that our experiences of them were impacted by whether it was a press box that was behind glass, because that's something that we're not used to in Europe, especially in England. But a lot of these stadiums, they're in such hot places that they want the press to have a nice experience and not sort of feel sweltering heat. And so the journalists often are behind plated glass, often soundproofed glass, which I don't love hugely, because it makes it difficult to understand the atmosphere, in an air-conditioned room, which, it is well intended, but doesn't feel very football, doesn't feel very World Cup. And so that was my experience in Dallas against Croatia. That was my experience against Panama in New York. I was in sort of, a lot of us, the UK media, were in sort of overflow press seating out in the open for the final between Spain and Argentina, which I even though it's warm and you feel that, you feel like you might faint, I do prefer that. It's a bit more real. So I think, you're impacted by that on a very real sense. But I thought that some of the best stadiums included Atlanta. A lot of people were raving about that. The shape, even though it's under a roof, it's a beautiful stadium. It's state of the art. It was deserving of some of the high profile matches it hosted, not least England versus Argentina in the semi-final. It was interesting to go to Miami, which was sweltering hot, but a stadium probably closer to the likes of which we're used to in the Premier League and certainly the Championship, in that it's more of a box. It's got 4 very distinct stands, which a lot of these bowl stadiums that end up being favoured in major tournaments can't. I'm not saying that that's not as good, but it's just something a little bit different. The Azteca, of course, was fantastic, but the stadium itself was massive, but was nothing sort of architecturally special, but didn't need to be, because the allure of the Azteca was that it was the Azteca, and that it was in Mexico City, and that England had got this history there, and that it's probably the closest thing to sort of a Mecca or a home of the World Cup, the only place where Pele and Diego Maradona lifted the trophy. So that didn't exactly need the extra sell, really. The Dallas Stadium was brilliant. I thought Foxborough, which was outside against Ghana, was quite a nice stadium. The worst of them was the MetLife. I don't mean from a working experience. It's fine. All I mean is, it's the most boring. It was the most. It was the most sort of soulless shape, both internally and exteriorly. And it's a great shame that there was a feeling that the World Cup final had to be in New York or New Jersey, because I just don't think that it did have to be. I think it could have been elsewhere. Didn't even have to be the Azteca. I think, Mexico's had its fair run of the World Cup. It could have been America, but I don't think it needed to be the MetLife personally.
Yeah. Well, let's go back to that Mexico game. another country that you've had to jump into. Was that straightforward? Having to go into Mexico from America?
Yes, it was straightforward, and it was even more straightforward getting back because I ended up in, I was on an indirect flight back to Kansas City after the game, and so I needed to change over, and so when I went through immigration, it was actually in, I think, Dallas, and but people ahead of me going through immigration, families spending 4 or 5 minutes each, which when you're in the queue is a long time for them to be speaking to any one family.
Yeah.
Doing all their fingerprinting. I had to do none of that. I arrived there expecting to have to do the same stuff. They looked at my passport. They said, "You're working the World Cup, are you?" And I said, "Yes." And they said, "Enjoy your day." So extremely simple for me. Yeah.
Because that game was surrounded by so much more noise, wasn't it? There was the day before here. I think, what was the game? It was on a Sunday night here or Monday morning.
Yeah.
And it was the Saturday, I think, where news broke during one of the games on the telly. I think it was like Mark Pugac all of a sudden at half time said there's talk of the game being brought back 12 hours or whatever it was.
6 hours, yeah.
6 hours. What? It must have been a lot of drama.
Yeah. That felt ludicrous, and it felt like just another example of something that's putting fans and the players, without whom the World Cup would be nothing, by the way, in both cases, last. Really, it felt like disrespecting players' pre-match routines. It felt like disrespecting fans who may have been flying in for the game on the day itself, and you might have found themselves in the situation where they're actually in the air by the time that the match kicks off. Of course, this World Cup was going to have weather-related issues, and did actually got off quite lightly. I think it could have been a heck of a lot worse, but even the suggestion of it, I think, was pitiful, really, and I'm glad that we never saw it materialize. But yes, it did mean that the pre-match was quite noisy indeed, including for the players, who were kept up at night by Mexico fans with their horns and their singing. But the whole of that week leading in, we were talking about, would those fans try and keep England's players awake? Would the weather be a problem? Would, particularly the altitude, of course, would the altitude be a problem? Because in the end, I think altitude, the players themselves said this, was far less of a problem than the sweltering heat that they experienced in Miami. But the reason why the journalists like myself and all of the media and fans were speaking about the altitude more so than the 32 degrees feels like 43 degrees that they experienced against Norway in Miami is because heat is a bit more of a normal challenge in football. Altitude is very novel, particularly for European teams. You don't hear about this stuff. Yeah. You hear sometimes that teams like Bolivia or Peru or Mexico play at altitude, but it's never real for European nations until you end up playing against Mexico in Mexico City. So then that was why I think that was milked, really, is because it was a kind of new and novel challenge. But England conquered it brilliantly.
Yeah, you didn't struggle personally with it, the altitude.
No, but you could feel it. You could feel it when you were walking up the stairs.
Right.
Definitely. And I've spoken to people since who've spent a lot more time in Mexico City sort of as holiday goers than me, who have said exactly the same. They also felt that it's the stairs and stairwells that get you. So at least it means I wasn't talking nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, what a game that was. It was a game that will live long in the memory for clearly those that were there and for those that stayed up into the early hours of Monday morning watching it. What was it like after the game? Because you must have been speaking with a few of the players and were in on the press conference as well.
Yeah, indeed. And look, personally speaking, I think we all knew that it was going to be a big spectacle. England going back to the Azteca for the first time since the hand of God, playing against the team that play there, that have such a good record there, trying to conquer the altitude, trying to reach the quarterfinal. It was all set up to be great drama. The one thing we didn't expect was that it would be good drama, that the actual match would be good, which I think many people wouldn't have been surprised if it hadn't been. And I think that was why everyone felt so treated. Fans who'd stayed up, into the early hours back home, and of course those of us who were fortunate enough to be there. Why we felt so lucky was that we were treated to probably the best match of the World Cup. Not just England's best win since the 1966 final, I would say, but a genuinely good football match objectively, from a neutral perspective. And of course, the players, as you say, were over the moon afterwards. I think it was John Stones who I spoke with after the game, and he was, just over the moon with having been a part of a team that had defended quite that resolutely. Of course, we weren't to know that resolute defending was going to be what killed England eventually 2 games later. But yeah, no, it was brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant, and I think they well deserved their victory, and the manner of the victory. Getting ahead, holding on towards the end, just added to the drama and sort of a feeling of having dipped into the Mexico City, stolen a victory, knocked out the hosts, and then cleared off onto the next mission. It did feel like England were sort of there to do a professional job and did it very well.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you mentioned that game 2 games on. Of course, we had Norway in between that as well, which to be honest, I felt we're fortunate to get through. Or Norway probably would regret some of their opportunities that they didn't take. But Argentina in the semi-final. Of course, as soon as it comes to a semi-final with England, everyone's almost looking towards the final in a strange way. But yeah, Argentina had got to that semi-final after a couple of haphazard games, I think would be a fair way of putting that. Cape Verde and Egypt. Well, Argentina are just one of those teams that the fixture England-Argentina has just got so much about it, and this one had it as well, didn't it?
Yeah, and Argentina were making a big fuss before the match about wanting to play in their away kit, which they would have played in anyway because they were the allotted away team. Yeah. They would have played in it anyway because they were the away team, but or allotted to be the away team. But they requested it anyway because they were so desperate to have a similar result to the one which they received in 1986. But also there was another win. I can't quite remember which one it would have been. 1998 in France.
Yes,
when they were also in their away kit. So as you say, a game that didn't need selling really. And yeah, such a disappointing way for England to have gone out. But you did feel privileged to be there because it was a very massive occasion, really, and a huge opportunity. And therefore, by the end, a huge opportunity squandered.
Yeah, just actually on Argentina and their kits. I don't know if you were aware, but the Argentina rugby team faced England, I think it was a few days after the semi-final. Right. And the Argentina rugby team wore a basically navy blue rugby shirt with silver letters on the back. So this sort of mind games plays across all different sort of Argentinian sports, it would appear.
Yes, indeed. I think that they sort of seem the sort of country who really do let the emotion power them, really. I mean, a lot of countries want to kind of rid themselves of that and think clearly about the game. In Argentina, you get the feeling kind of need it as fuel.
Yeah. Well, it works for them to a certain extent. I saw you had I don't want to say an altercation, but in your press conference with Thomas, you're part of the press conference and asked Thomas Tuchel a question. He didn't take too kindly to it, did he?
No, he didn't. I mean, that was the pre-match press conference before the France game, but it obviously dust hadn't completely settled after England's exit. And I just got the feeling, in the couple of days after the Argentina match, and certainly was getting the feeling again as that press conference was continuing, that he just didn't really quite understand the level of the vitriol that had come his way, or the level of criticism that had come his way. I think he didn't quite understand that it wasn't personal, and that people weren't suddenly, they weren't randomly turning on the man that had been hired to get England out of trouble. They were just astounded by the fact that it was certainly in my eyes the worst ever example of the very failing that leads England to get knocked out of most of their tournaments. And I think he didn't understand that was always going to draw criticism if he, the kind of win now manager, the get England over the line manager, fell by the wayside in exactly the same way. If England had lost in a very brave way, the like of which we hadn't seen before, and had been close, to getting it done, and lost because of a different failing that England had never lost to before, I think the criticism would have been less. I think it was the fact that it was the 45-minute or the 40-minute retreat, the worst ever retreat that I would say that England have produced in a major tournament, something we've been talking about for decades, long before I was born, that was the reason that he invited that much criticism. And so when he was early on in those answers in that press conference, he was speaking about the blame game. I understand that you may need the blame game to be played, he said. And I just thought, no, you're not understanding it. And I actually really like Thomas Tuchel. I think he's been fantastic to work with. He produces some fantastic quotes that make our articles richer. But I just thought, you're not getting it. You're feeling personally attacked by the criticism, and you're not understanding that all there is a desire from fans and journalists to understand why the 35 minutes he was hired to get right, he couldn't get right, because he wasn't hired for the group stage. He wasn't hired for DR Congo and for Norway and for Mexico, really. He was hired for the 35 minutes against Argentina when England were 1-0 up and on their way to a final. He was hired for those clutch moments where some managers previously have failed, and he was going to be the one that was going to show England a braver and a different way. And in the worst possible circumstances, to the worst previously seen extent, he didn't manage it. And that was why it invited criticism. So I said to him, you've said about the blame game being played, but surely you understand why fans and journalists want to understand whether it is you or whether it is the players, and which decisions led to the loss of a lead 5 minutes from time. And he kept interrupting me, and he said, I think I have been willing to explain it, and I think I have answered it, so I don't understand your question. I think what he meant, of course, was I don't want to answer your question, or I feel I have answered it. Well, I wouldn't have asked it if I felt that he'd answered it. I felt that he'd been dodging it and had been saving face and been defensive and deflecting. And he doesn't even need to look. He doesn't even need to believe that it's his fault, but at least explain then that you think it's the player's fault. In reality, he's just said, I think some of the criticism has been unfair, and he's never really gone into it. So that was why I thought it was a valid question.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you said that he's a good manager and good for quotes on that front. Is there any players that you've sort of had a lot more respect for this last 5 weeks, so you've interacted with a bit more?
Yeah, we spoke. I mean, one of the interviews that stands out was we spoke with Anthony Gordon, and we spoke with him after Mexico City, I think, and before. Yeah, I think that's right. And before Norway, and he was very, very willing to accept the suggestion that he had been disappointed and frustrated with himself about how he'd played against Croatia and Ghana, and had maybe deserved to be dropped against Panama. And, said that he had used those performances, those disappointing performances, as fuel to have a bigger impact for England as the tournament wore on. And I think no one more than Anthony Gordon and Jed Spence grew into the tournament for England, really. Yeah. And so he spoke very well about that. He spoke extremely well about the slightly awkward situation he was finding himself in with Marcus Rashford, where he'd signed for Barcelona and was potentially going to be inadvertently the direct reason why Marcus Rashford doesn't join Barcelona permanently. And also that is the player that he was facing, and battling for game time with for England on the left wing. Spoke very well against Marcus Rashford, explained that he thinks that the player has been misunderstood and maybe overly criticised as a person, went into detail about why he feels that way. And spoke about the manager, spoke about his will to win, said that he felt that 4 minutes off the bench in a 0-0 draw with Slovenia, being the extent of his game time at Euro 2024, made that summer, quote, a waste of time, to be honest, which was a very strong quote, but clearly he's used that experience as fuel as well, because England, of course, got to the final of Euro 2024, so that wasn't exactly a short summer. That was 5 weeks away from the family, or 6 weeks away, for 6 minutes.
Yes.
So he is someone I've, and he's very articulate as well. So he's someone I've got respect for, as having spoken to him. I mean, there are some class acts who always give you good quotes and who always understand why you're there and represent England well. Harry Kane is the obvious one. I think John Stones falls into that category as well.
I mean, we could talk on and on. I'd love to hear more of your stories, and of course, you got to see the final as well. Although not a final that will live long in the memory. But we said at the beginning, are you one of those people that tallied up all those things that you did?
Yeah, I mean,
give us the numbers.
Well, I can tell you the numbers of flights, which was 17 flights over the month and a week. So that was a lot of air travel. 11 matches as well, 8 England games within that, and the final as well. And yeah, that's the numbers. I don't know how many goals I saw, but no, it might be 36 or 37 from memory.
Right.
So yeah, plenty of goals. No, it was of course a brilliant World Cup on the pitch. It was just not a brilliant World Cup off the pitch.
Yeah. Do you think it will live long in the memory, the World Cup, or are there better ones?
I think it will live long in the memory as the last World Cup before FIFA sold off shares in the tournament. Yeah.
Well, there's another story, isn't it? Yes.
Yes, indeed. Which we don't need to get into because it will frustrate me, and probably frustrate you as well,
and a lot of other people. We're just gonna have to wait and see how that pans out. It's an unfortunate situation that's come about after it. Dom, thank you very much. As I say, I'd love to carry on chatting with you and hearing more of your stories. But I just want to say thank you. I say well done, because this must have been the dream to get to the World Cup.
Yes, of course it was a dream indeed, and it was a fantastic summer, and the football lived up to the expectations. So yeah, obviously no complaints from me.
Absolutely. Well, I'm no doubt we will talk again in due course about England, because the Nations League kickstarts again soon.
Yes, absolutely. England will have to dust themselves off and go again. Yeah.
Well, I look forward to it. All the best. We'll speak to you soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much to Dom there. Always a pleasure to have him on the show. Hope he gave you an insight into the side of the tournament that we didn't see. Very kind of him to give us some time. Don't forget, you can follow him over on the socials. If you're on Twitter, at Mr. Dom Smith, and that is the same on Instagram, at Mr. Dom Smith. There we go. And don't forget, you can follow the show here, Three Lions Podcast, also on the socials. Just search Three Lions Podcast. Give it a like, give it a follow. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed that episode, and I will be back with you very soon. I'm hoping to try and speak with a couple of other people who were in a working capacity at the World Cup, to hear what it was like for them. But I've got to work on that. I've got a couple of other episodes in the pipeline that I'll hope to bring you very soon as well. So stay subscribed and you won't miss them. So until next time, take care of yourselves. Cheers.